Tonight on Ukraine Today, explosions and fires in Russia. Ukrainian drones have hit an oil refinery in Volgograd. The plant produces diesel, gasoline and jet fuel, all critical for the occupiers' army. The frontline situation, from Russian and Ukrainian losses to enemy buildup of weapons and troops. Chilling statistics. Civilian casualties in Ukraine from Russian strikes in July reach a new 3-year high. On the eve of the Alaska summit, does Donald Trump believe he can convince the Russian dictator to stop shelling peaceful Ukrainians? All that and more, right now. Hello, my name is Volodymyr Rabchun. Hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, and let's get to the news. Ukrainian drones struck an oil refinery in Volgograd. Local authorities confirmed oil products were burning. The plant produces diesel, gasoline and jet fuel, all vital for Russia's war machine. That makes it a legitimate target. Russia's so-called defense ministry claimed its air defense shot down 44 drones over Russia and Crimea. Once again, destroying a drone at its target is not interception. Russian losses at the front are now 3 times higher than Ukraine's. The enemy is building up weapons and manpower in the Donetsk region for a new offensive. More from the battlefield in our story.
Russia has broken through the Ukrainian armed forces' defensive line. The command is trying to reassure everyone, saying it's just a few sabotage and reconnaissance groups. Western analysts are already speculating about what the loss of the entire Donetsk region could mean. Meanwhile, Ukraine has launched a counter-offensive in the Sumy region and has recaptured a third of the occupied territories. All the latest frontline news right now. The Russians made a sudden breakthrough at the front ahead of the Putin-Trump meeting. This was reported by the Wall Street Journal. The occupiers found a gap in the Ukrainian defenses and then used their massive manpower reserves to break through. This concerns the salient in the direction of Dobropilya in the Donetsk region.
Now, naturally, Russian forces will try to take advantage of this moment, attempting to secure their positions, send in additional reinforcements, more troops, and possibly even equipment. And right now, probably in the next few days, the Ukrainian armed forces have a chance to somehow contain this breakthrough, maybe cut off the units that broke through by liberating territory at the very base of this breach, or start attacking from different directions and take, say, all the villages and settlements along the way so that there's nowhere for them to hide and so on.
At the same time, military analysts report that the Russian Federation does not control the entire territory that the assault troops managed to pass through. Most likely during the breakthrough, they were moving in light vehicles, and at this point, it cannot be said that the enemy has managed to gain a foothold and take control of the entire salient.
For now, there are only sabotage and reconnaissance groups present there. These are irregular troops. These groups are dangerous because they are mobile and they will try to seize vehicles in order to infiltrate further. But it should also be remembered that Russian forces constantly use this tactic of small groups to accumulate at certain lines and then advance further.
The Ukrainian command has already responded to the Russian breakthrough. It is reported that the most combat-ready units of the National Guard, specifically from the Azov battalion, have been redeployed to reinforce this direction. Those very small assault groups have already felt the impact of this firsthand.
They wanted to go in as groups, but got hit hard. Now we still can't get back out.
Also, commenting on the situation, the spokesperson for the Dnipro troop grouping confirmed the Russians' local success, but noted that it involved about a dozen fighters who managed to slip through the line of demarcation and were pinned down in combat wherever they managed to reach.
It's not about them taking control of this territory. What actually happened is that a small number of Russians, between 5 and 10 people, managed to get through. And it's absolutely not how it looks on the map. It's not like they took control of the entire route they traveled. They made their way through and tried to hide in a single basement.
At the same time, experts note that Pokrovsk itself, the city that all these efforts to encircle were aimed at, and which is located somewhat south of the breakthrough site, continues to hold its ground quite confidently, despite constant heavy assaults.
Overall, if it weren't for this very breakthrough near Dobrpilya right now, I would say that the situation has somewhat stabilized over the past 2 weeks. That is, the Russian troops had been acting actively up until then, but at Rodinsky they really hit a serious obstacle. And for a couple of weeks now there have been heavy battles there, but they haven't been able to advance. So, basically, the defense of this sort of semicircular salient is holding quite confidently. I'll put it cautiously from the perspective of the Ukrainian armed forces. Of course, these are heavy battles. As I've already said, there are a lot of Russian forces there, they're constantly attacking, but nevertheless, we're not seeing any kind of collapse or crisis.
The situation is also tense north of Pokrovsk. There, the Russians have become active again in the Lyman direction. However, after several days of intensified attacks, apart from dozens of killed assault troops, Russia has gained nothing here.
Right now, we are currently seeing increased movement and activity in the area of the Serebryansky forest, a region known for its forestry operations. Essentially, this is an attempt to move further south towards Sloviansk. Will the enemy succeed in this? Will our forces find the necessary reserves? Well, I don't know. In principle, we do have forces that can, well, hold back the enemy's advance.
Monitoring channels are also reporting Russian activity in Crimea. Equipment is currently being transferred there from the Moscow and Leningrad military districts, with the possibility of it being further sent to the Zaporizhzhia direction or near Pokrovsk. However, in recent months, for Russia, using armored vehicles in assaults has become a major luxury, so the entire operation could simply turn out to be a bluff.
Some of the equipment is more or less available, meaning it can even be moved back and forth just to distract attention. We can't rule out that possibility either. At the moment, yes, the Russian forces haven't set any particularly difficult tasks for the Ukrainian armed forces, specifically on the Zaporizhzhia front in Zaporizhzhia region. That is, yes, there have been some local attacks there. Maybe they'll try to create some more serious tension, including to force reserves to be redeployed from the Pokrovsk direction, so that there simply aren't enough forces everywhere.
But on the Sumy direction, it's the Russians who don't have enough forces. According to President Volodymyr Zelensky, in the Sumy region, the Ukrainian armed forces managed to retake a third of all the settlements that had been captured, that is, 6 out of 18. In 2 locations, according to Zelensky, the defense forces even reached the border with Russia.
They can't even properly hold on to these territories. It's not the first village already. Some have been cleared, some have been liberated. Yes, 2 settlements have been freed. Fighting is still ongoing for Alexeyevka. So, the Ukrainian military is gradually, of course within their means, it's clear they don't have a large number of reserves. But nevertheless, they are reducing this bridgehead. It is not expanding. On the contrary, it is gradually shrinking. And all this is because, for example, during the incursion into the Sumy region, Russian troops are not using heavy equipment, which makes it much harder for them to defend.
The defense forces are also holding their positions in the Zaporizhzhia region and have advanced 1 kilometer deeper into enemy positions in Luhansk.
In the past 24 hours, Russia has lost at least 990 troops killed and wounded. Since the start of the full-scale invasion, that's already 1,067,100 soldiers. On top of that, in just the last day, Ukraine's defense forces destroyed 5 Russian tanks, 3 armored vehicles, 29 artillery systems and dozens of other pieces of enemy equipment. There's been another prisoner exchange. Ukraine brought home 84 more people, both military and civilians. Among them, the defenders of Mariupol and political prisoners. North Korea is planning to send more troops to Russia soon. That's according to Ukraine's military intelligence chief, Kyrylo Budanov. He says it's about 6,000 soldiers and up to 100 units of North Korean hardware, including tanks and armored personnel carriers. Budanov added that only 3 countries today have real experience fighting on a wide front line: Ukraine, Russia and North Korea. And here's how Russia threats North Korean citizens. 18 hours work days, 2 days off, a year, terrible living conditions and constant armed escort. I'm sure Kim Jong-un knows about this. He just doesn't care. Details in our story.
Here I am at the Samole construction site. This is the workers' camp. There are Koreans working at this construction site. They're working, go ahead.
Getting access to a site where North Koreans are working isn't that easy. This video from Primary only appeared online because of a scandal. Locals reported to the police that workers from the DPRK were killing and eating dogs at the construction site.
Here it is, this pot. There's no blood in the pot, it's just kimchi.
6 North Koreans who managed to escape from Russia told the BBC about the inhumane living conditions and treatment. They worked on construction sites almost around the clock at night, often without light, and if they were lucky, they got 2 days off a year. And all of this was under the watchful eye of North Korean security service officers, and of course, with no contact with the outside world, even outside the construction site. In 2 years of work, this man did not receive a single penny.
They treated us like mere animals, not as human beings, which was truly dehumanizing. Other workers constantly said that we were just Kim Jong-un's slaves. They mocked us and said, "You are not people, you are just machines that can talk."
Cheap labor from North Korea? Pyongyang is helping the Kremlin not only with weapons and cannon fodder for the war in Ukraine. Because of the consequences of the full-scale invasion, the aggressor country is facing a colossal labor shortage. And here too, North Korea comes to the rescue. According to South Korean intelligence, last year Kim Jong-un sent Putin 13,000 forced laborers. That's 12 times more than the previous year. And already this year, 2025, the dictators have agreed to send 50,000.
Back in those days when the entire North Korean trade turnover, that's not profit, but turnover, meaning exports and imports combined, just the total sales volume amounted to about $6 or $7 billion a year. But the income from the workers alone was somewhere between $250 and $500 million. That was practically pure profit. So it was just a very lucrative business, and it still remains profitable even now. Now, I think the capacity of the Russian market is such that, well, it's easy to accommodate 100,000 North Korean workers. I think the main limitation is actually the number of North Koreans who are allowed to go to Russia.
Russians have long made active use of rightless North Koreans. Skilled workers from the DPRK have built quite a few properties in Vladivostok. Even this bridge across the Golden Horn Bay, which has become the city's calling card, is their handiwork. On August 11th, they celebrated 13 years since its opening. Legalized labor slavery didn't interest many people in Russia even back then.
We had no choice. We had to come here. Personally, I would have preferred to stay at home. We come, we work, and then we go back.
How much do you earn here?
I don't know. None of us know. We don't get paid our wages.
I truly need to find work, and I absolutely need to achieve positive results. They consistently provide me with exactly that.
But human rights activists claim that North Korean workers are essentially state slaves.
I've long since turned a blind eye to that and don't concern myself with it anymore. Of course, this is illegal because these people have the right to request refugee status.
So you believe that Moscow is violating international law?
Unfortunately, I am certain of it. Back at the end of 2017, the international community tried to cut off Pyongyang's gold mine. The UN adopted a resolution obligating all member states to repatriate all DPRK citizens working abroad within 2 years. This measure was taken to reduce the flow of foreign currency into the hands of dictator Kim Jong-un. But this did not decrease the flow of slaves to Russia. They simply started registering them as students. Even now, out of the 13,000 North Koreans who officially entered Russia, 8,000 are supposedly there for study. But no matter how difficult the hardships faced by North Korean migrant workers, the chance to earn $1,500 a year is not something everyone in a dictatorship gets. That's why a trip to Russia has been and will continue to be a lucky ticket for the average North Korean. The chances of escaping the country are getting slimmer and slimmer, and not everyone dares to escape from Russia either. Only those with families are allowed to go abroad for work, and their children remain as hostages of Kim's regime.
Civilian deaths in Ukraine from Russia's attacks in July reached a new 3-year high. That's according to UN officials. 286 people were killed, another 1,388 were injured. The total number of civilian casualties in the first 7 months of 2025 is 48% higher than the same period in 2024. In London, the Ukraine's president met the UK Prime Minister. Zelensky and Starmer discussed security guarantees for Ukraine under the coalition of the willing, continued support for Ukraine's defense forces and investments in Ukrainian drone production. They also shared their expectations from the Alaska summit. Earlier, there was an online meeting between President Zelensky, European leaders and US President Trump. Participants agreed on 5 principles for the negotiation process with Russia.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
Everything about Ukraine must be discussed only with Ukraine. We need to prepare a trilateral format for talks. There must be a ceasefire, that's number one. There must be truly reliable security guarantees. And today, by the way, President Trump voiced his support for this and America's readiness to take part. Also, among the agreed principles is that Russia cannot have a veto over Ukraine's European or NATO future. And peace talks should be combined with proper pressure on Russia. Sanctions must stay in place and even be strengthened if Russia, in Alaska, refuses to agree to a ceasefire. These are effective principles. Now, the main thing is to make sure they work.
Ukraine is fighting for freedom. Support independent Ukrainian journalism, so we can keep telling the truth about Russia's war. Click the link in the description to become our sponsor. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and give this video a like. It really helps. And share it if you think it's worth watching. Thanks a lot to everyone who does. The US Treasury has temporarily lifted restrictions of any financial transactions with Russia related to preparing and holding the Alaska summit. The waiver is valid until August 20th. However, it does not apply to frozen assets and other sanctions unrelated to the meeting. Representatives of Russia's so-called defense ministry claim Kyiv is planning a provocation to disrupt the talks between President Trump and dictator Putin. Nonsense, but worth noting, as it could signal the Kremlin is preparing provocations. Details next.
But Russia cannot just calmly go and sign a comprehensive peace agreement, right?
All disappointments, in essence, arise from excessively high expectations, truly.
Well, of course, who would doubt that? That's exactly why the Russian Ministry of Defense has now claimed that Kyiv is allegedly preparing a provocation to disrupt the upcoming talks between the US president and the Kremlin dictator.
To this end, on Monday, August 11th, a group of foreign media journalists was brought by SBU vehicles to the city of Chuhuiv in the Kharkiv region, under the cover story of preparing a series of reports about residents living in the frontline zone. Directly before the summit on Friday, the Ukrainian armed forces planned a provocative strike using UAVs and missiles on one of the densely populated residential neighborhoods or a hospital, with the intention of causing a large number of civilian casualties.
You really had to come up with something like that.
Here you just can't do without creativity, without initiative, without a proactive approach.
Yes, it's already clear that you can't get anywhere without creativity. But still, you would think that a one-on-one meeting with Trump would be a dream for Putin. So why sabotage it and blame Ukraine in the process?
Again, this is an old Kremlin story, a classic Soviet-era narrative where they consistently accused others of precisely what they themselves were actually engaged in doing. So there's nothing new here. All the schemes are completely familiar and absolutely old. One difference: before there were two systems with different ideologies, but now Putin has no ideology at all, except for trying to intimidate everyone and steal everything, yes.
And we almost believed Lukashenko about Putin's desire for a truce.
Once again, it's an imaginary truce. I say yes, Russia is interested in this and President Putin as well, but you don't want this.
But here's the main question: how far can that statement actually go? Could Russia really strike at the residents of Kharkiv? Or will it not go any further than just threats?
I would say they definitely have no moral restraints whatsoever. But how far could this actually go? Unfortunately, there really are absolutely no inherent limits for them here in this particular situation. So this entire situation could potentially go very, very far, or it might not go far at all in the grand scheme of things. Ultimately, it truly depends entirely on how they collectively decide that things should be handled and resolved.
Nevertheless, despite the upcoming meeting with Trump, Putin still manages to scare everyone with his Oreshnik.
We have produced the first serial Oreshnik system, the first serial missile, yes. And it has been delivered to the troops.
Well, of course, what kind of talk about peace would it be without showing off some iron Oreshniks? For Putin, it's almost a tradition now to remind everyone of his strength before sitting down at the negotiating table. But what does this actually mean? Is it a willingness to compromise or an attempt to raise the stakes right away?
Putin isn't ready for anything. He's not prepared to make any concessions. And in fact, this attempted offensive demonstrates exactly that. So the only thing he will do is try to stir things up with provocations and somehow tell Trump all sorts of tall tales, just like they always do.
But no matter how you look at it, for Putin, this is an opportunity. Well, at least that's what he thinks. After all, a meeting with Trump is less about a peaceful settlement and more about personal interests.
He wants a kind of repeat of the Yalta format. You know, like when the world was divided up after World War II. Except back then, along with America, there was also Great Britain, let me remind you, and the Soviet Union. Accordingly, for him, this meeting with Trump is an attempt to return to a bipolar world. But even if the world does become bipolar, the second pole will be China, not Russia at all. But Putin doesn't want to think about that.
In fact, even Trump himself doesn't quite know what to expect from this meeting.
I expect that the meeting with Putin will be good. Well, or maybe not.
Well, at least Trump was honest about it. And just then, a convenient statement regarding Ukraine came in. But will it actually influence Trump's rhetoric?
Trump is so unpredictable that it's impossible to even imagine what's really going on in his head and what might influence him, like the morning weather, whether it's cold or, on the contrary, hot in Alaska, or the coffee he was served in the morning. Well, I mean, it certainly seems to me that all these various little things might actually significantly affect Donald Trump's overall mood and disposition. But most importantly, I would like to hope that Trump doesn't want to look like an idiot in this situation.
The bilateral talks between Trump and Putin will take place on Friday, August 15th in Alaska. But Vladimir Zelensky himself has firmly stated that no decisions regarding Ukraine will be made without Ukraine's own participation.
Meanwhile, President Trump spoke to the press and shared his vision for the upcoming Alaska summit. He said if the first meeting goes well, there's a chance a second one will follow, with Zelensky, Putin and Trump, if all sides agree to that format. If the talks go badly, there will be no second round. If Putin refuses to end the war, Trump warned of very serious consequences. And here's the moment you should pay close attention to. When asked if he believes he can convince the Russian dictator to stop shelling peaceful Ukrainians, the US president said this.
Well, I'll tell you what, I've had that conversation with him. I've had a lot of good conversations with him. Then I go home and I see that a rocket hit a nursing home or a rocket hit an apartment building and people are laying dead in the streets. So I guess the answer to that is no, because I've had this conversation. I want to end the war.
So end the war without Russia stopping its attacks on civilians in Ukraine? How would it work? And really, why does Trump even need to meet with Putin? I can see why the Russian dictator needs it. Photos with Trump, a handshake, heaven forbid, basically creating the image that global isolation is over. Plus, Putin will, of course, try to convince his counterpart to stop or cut US support for Ukraine. But why does Trump need it? After all, the Nobel Peace Prize is given for real achievements, not for loud, empty statements and meaningless meetings. And I'm not just bringing up the Nobel Peace Prize out of nowhere. The White House has officially nominated Trump for it. The move is backed by leaders of Israel, Azerbaijan, Armenia, Cambodia and Gabon, plus Pakistan's government and Rwanda's foreign minister. Meanwhile, French satirical weekly Charlie Hebdo ran a cover titled "Trump and Putin Nobel Prize for Barbecue." It reflects fears that the US and the Russian presidents could make deals over Ukraine's fate without Ukraine's input and with major concessions to the aggressor. That's all for today. Thanks for watching. Thank you for your support. Strength to Ukraine's defenders. Glory to Ukraine. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment and share this video. See you next time.